All right, that's good enough. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to the first digital lunch of the Spring 2025 series. And we are starting out with an absolute bang because we have Reb here, who is a University of York postdoctoral researcher and on the Cults of the Head project, of which I'm a very, very, very small part, but Ian Armitt is the PI on that one. And it has been an immense honor to be working with Reb in that she has single-handedly really elevated digital imaging in this project. She has really explored all the limits of what you can do with artifacts analysis and photography. And has found some really exciting things as well, some of which I think will be disclosed and some of which cannot be disclosed yet. But this really reflects Reb's deep interactions with kind of the animal and the human in representation in art, especially from around this time period, the Latine?
Yeah, the Latin.
Yeah. So it's been really fascinating to see her contend with all of these different kinds of imagery that have been coming up in all these mixed shapes and forms, but also very much through a digital lens. And what I really admire also about Reb is that her deep commitment to community archaeology as well, in that she is not only content to do all these advanced analyses, to really contend with the material record, but also to communicate the past to as many publics as she possibly can.
Too many.
So without further ado, let me introduce Reb.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. So I'm here to talk about the Cults of the Head project, which is coming to an end in June. But the great thing about this project is at the very end of it, all the images you see will all be open access on the ADS, along with a critical catalogue, all the database for future research, etc. So it's all going to be there. So where are we talking about? So Dean Hall Roman Temple is on the Monmouthshire side of the River Severn, but still within the county of Gloucestershire. And it's a very little known Roman temple, mainly because it has been under private ownership probably since the late medieval period. It is on the old manorial estate. The nearest town is Cinderford. And if it wasn't for the fact there was a really great 6-foot farm hedge in the way, this is actually the view you get from the site on the River Severn. It is on a little hill between two slightly larger hills and has this most fantastic landscape view. And it is very much the river that we believe is important to the siting of the temple. But we've also got to be clear that actually the temple is not the first phase of archaeology on this site. It actually, we believe elements of the site certainly go back probably all the way up to the Neolithic. But I can't talk more about that at the minute because that is still all in progress. This is what the site looks like today. Now, it was originally excavated by Professor Barry Jones of the University of Manchester back in the 1980s on invitation from the local landowner. And the standing architecture you can see remaining there is what we call a typical Roman nymphaeum, i.e. a temple that is specifically based on a water shrine. And so what we actually have here is there is a spring that is fed in from this corner and has been made into a main pool here. And as you can see, it still floods, which has not been very useful for excavation. So Barry Jones came and excavated it in the 1980s. It's written up in Britannia. However, the landowner, who was a young man at the time of the excavations, decided he wanted to return to the site and dig further, find out more. And from 2016 till, thank God, only last year, I finally convinced him to stop. They found something, well, they found lots of things that are very unusual, but the particularly unusual thing we're going to be talking about today are about 150 anthropomorphic human depictions in stone. And here is just a few. It is the largest known corpus of anthropomorphic stone imagery found from any site in Britain, and it is only paralleled by 1/2 sites in the Roman Empire regarding the density of imagery. And heads like this really massively challenge us on so many levels, because what you can probably see here is the huge variety in style. the huge individuality in object type. We're very used to talking about art in this period in very strict categorical terms. La Ten Late Iron Age art with its own specific a group of motifs and aspects of human and animal imagery. And then the early Roman and this idea of Romano-British classical art, your very nice, neat, kind of art gallery level kind of naturalistic representation. And as you can see, these are both this group alone is as far away from these as you can possibly get in both directions. So this site really is a challenge. Now, this is therefore what the Cults of the Head project is designed to do. We are looking to understand and contextualize this art, both in terms of the site, i.e. where are these heads deposited? How are they deposited? Can we identify ritualistic behavior through that? But also on a wider cosmological level, what is the role of human depiction at this site specifically? And why is it so strong at this particular temple compared to other temples throughout the empire? And you can read more about the Cults of the Head aims and objectives in the Leverhulme magazine article, annual review that came out, but also in the Prehistoric Society past newsletter from last summer. I'll go quickly through digital imagery techniques. Thank God I included this bit after the introduction I got. And so what is perhaps a little bit different of what I do compared to others is that I use 2D macro photography like so many do, but I use a specific technique called focus stacking. And that is why when you look at all the images, there isn't a blurry bit on there that's out of focus. Every bit is in focus. Takes a little bit longer, but the results are entirely worth it. For this project, I've been using the new Nikon Z7 II, which is a mirrorless digital camera body. First time I've used a mirrorless, I have to say, very impressed, love it. Definitely the way to go, but in combination with mirrored lenses. I've also been using reflectance transformation imaging, which is the Broncolor D50 dome that we have, and I'll go through that in a second. And also I've been using our USB Dynalight microscopes as well to capture some imagery, but also to slightly study how certain items are made. What is focus stacking? Well, this is head 21, which is about that thick from front to back, okay? There is no way if I focus at the very front of the image that all of it is going to be in focus. It's not going to happen with a macro lens, and we want to use macro lenses to get that beautiful detail so that when you zoom in on a computer screen, you get clarity. You can study these objects despite them not being in the room with you. So what focus stacking does, which is not a new technique, is that what you do is you focus at the very front of the object, the part that's closest to your camera lens. You then set up how many photographs you want the camera to take per depth. And what it does is it goes through focal steps from the front to the back, takes images. You then stick it in a piece of software. I like to use the Serif Affinity programs because it's a lot cheaper than Photoshop. And basically it stitches all the focused bits together for you, and you therefore get an image that's totally in focus from front to back. Some of these heads, I took 5 photographs from front to back to get it all in focus. Some like this took 20 to 30. But with the right processes, it doesn't actually take a huge amount of time. We then use the reflectance transformation imaging dome. This particular model takes 48 photos with a different light source, combines the photos in specialist software, and allows you to digitally manipulate the light to see details and aspects that may not be actually visible to you with the naked human eye. And it also allows the creations of surface models, which means you can remove color, which can actually trick your eye into seeing things or not seeing things. So for instance, this is head 26. It's a nice big flat slab. The black material you can see there, it's like a bitumen that this particular head leaks. It's like a bitumen tar kind of substance. And you can see on the top here, it happens on the top. Now we saw through the analysis that I could see there were some faint striations as if somebody had tried to give this one hair. And on top, I couldn't see anything because of the black, but you do the RTI, remove the color, create a surface model, and there you can see somebody did try and give this individual hair. Little details like that, which help us understand, categorize, classify, but also just give a little bit of human detail as well that sometimes can be forgotten when studying art. And then I've been using Dynalight. Now, Dynalights are really useful, particularly when you've got surfaces like this. This is a water-worn river pebble that has then been turned into a disc-like shape. And as you can see, behind the major tool markings, you've got all these really fine scratches behind. And actually what we did with this what we were able to discern was that the fine scratches happened before the major design was going on there. So whatever was going on in terms of where this was in society, people were fiddling around with this and just, whether it was in their pocket and it was scratching against something in their pocket or a rucksack, something was happening in the life of this stone before it then became a piece of art. But what's really nice, what you can also see here, is that there are phases of art. Here, they planned out a nose and then decided to shift it. So again, it's layering. These are not objects where a person has necessarily had a fantastic, well thought out idea, or they're making these objects to order and have then decided, yes, this is what I'm going with. There's an element of play and of reworking. And actually we have a lot of evidence for stone recycling as well. Now, I'm not going to go through the whole site chronology. I can confirm we have Bronze Age cremations on the site. So it does have a long history. The phases of chronology we're going to focus on are the late Iron Age to early Roman. Now, you'll have to forgive the fact that the images that I'm using are supplied by the excavators. We have no hand in the excavation of this site whatsoever. This is all secondary information to us, so I'm just working with what I have. Hence, these images are perhaps not the kind of quality we would normally like to see. So the really main important phase for starting for us is phase 1A. And what happens is around the main pool, which is fed by that spring, we have two standing stones, which we believe are from an earlier structure, the origins and design of which we're still trying to figure out. And around between these two standing stones, around the back of the pool, there is some kind of wooden palisade enclosure type enclosure that's placed. And basically what this is doing around the pool, it's controlling movement to a specific entryway. And what it's also doing with these standing stones is this site in this late Iron Age period is incorporating the past. It's not erasing what's been there before. For whatever reason, this site is important to late Iron Age communities. What was going on before they arrived and before they decided to do something to it was part of that. But then very quickly, what happens is one of the standing stones here is removed and replaced with a wooden post. This one stays in right till the 2nd century AD. The pool is shortened, it is shrunk, it is specifically shaped. There is active water management on this site. And then what happens in this spot here, we've got some kind of odd post deposition. We think it may have been a socket for a statue or totem pole, kind of equivalent post, something that's a focus point on the pool here. And as you can see, they still continue to use the wooden palisade area to control that movement. And around this side here, you can see the stones underneath the, just here. This is all a very well trod down area. So people are coming in, depositing things in the pool, etc. And we think phase 1A and 1B are happening roughly the 1st century BC to the 1st century AD, but definitely prior to Roman conquest and prior to Roman cultural adoption of aspects. Why is this important to us? Well, from a couple of the post holes, we've had heads. And so we think that the creation and deposition of stone heads, anthropomorphic images, started particularly at this point. The great thing about this particular example is he's got the fantastic droopy face with the droopy mustache in fine art. And up on here, he's got the slicked back hair, all very typical of late Iron Age style. So the styling is working with us in terms of when we think the deposition is starting, everything's sort of making sense. Even though, unfortunately, we don't have AMS dates or other dating material to back any of this up, we're having to very much go by the artifactual record. Then what happens in phase 2 in the 1st century AD is that the circular pool is replaced with a square one. And this is the first proper Roman phases, if you like, i.e. the application of Roman architectural design. We have the removal of the fence, the remains of which you can see in the black holes there. And at first we have a peristyle courtyard arrangement before then the construction of the remains basically of what you saw on the aerial image. And it's basically the 2nd century AD where the formal nymphaeum comes in, and that does sort of obliterate what's gone before. That is sort of a new starting point. Now, this site, they don't stop mucking around with it, which is really infuriating because with the wetness and with the soil conditions, it's been very difficult for the excavators to sort out the phasing and to date it accurately. We have very little pottery from the site, almost no metalwork. We had a few coin hoards, but unfortunately they were stolen in a house burglary in the 1990s. But thankfully the records remain and they are 3rd to 4th century. They're well-known types. And then at some point, as with what happened with many temples in the UK and in the Empire, In the 4th to 5th century AD, eventually this site was dismantled, and possibly a building afterwards, but we're not entirely sure. And so because of this very busy chronological sequence, and because of all these heads and the lack of other very typical, or what we would consider to be typical material culture lacking from this temple, no pottery, no bone, animal bone particularly, no brooches, no seal boxes, no pins, absolute absence. What is going on here? And so there are so many questions. These are just a few. I'm not literally going to go through them all. But what I'm going to do is basically go through what the analysis of the heads has told us to help us about this site. And by the end of it, what I'm basically going to answer, the question I'm going to answer is, well, how unusual is this site really as a sort of unique site in Britain regarding the density of art? How unusual is the site, its story, its history, the activity compared to other sites that we know about? And so, yeah, we're going to start at the beginning because, you know, that's a useful place to start with the earliest styles of art that we definitely have from this period. And we definitely have Latin human styles, late Iron Age human styles. Now, this particular example is Latin, he's a Latin 1B male, that's my personal typology. He's the slicked back male. He's the most common male depiction you will see throughout Iron Age Europe. He starts in Europe at about 400 BC, and you can see him in metalwork, you can see him in woodwork, you can even see him in stone. And in Britain, he continues through probably till the 2nd century AD. Just because the Romans arrived does not mean art of the local style stops overnight. And the other best example that you can see here is from the Marlborough bucket, the most figuratively decorated vessel in Britain, second only to the Gundestrup cauldron out in Denmark. And you can see he's clearly here. And here, he's been in Britain a long time. This is also from Gloucestershire. This is a mask and fiddle style type brooch. These were fashionable in southern Germany about 450 to 380 BC. And somebody from Gloucestershire went, I'll copy that, thanks, instead of going over to grab one. It's not a true mask and fiddle. It was not made in southern Germany. It was made over here. But you can see that same slicked back style of human hair is there. And so we know there is late Iron Age art here in terms of cultural influence, in terms of the development of the heads, as you can see here from our slab head 32. But what's interesting is we don't just have males represented in Iron Age art, we have females represented as well. And this is where it's really quite funky. So even though it's only a fragment, the way that the hair moves across this head style on this particular example is very characteristic of one particular type of bobbed hair female depiction. This is what she would have looked like, probably minus the talk, when complete. This is an example from the Rinkeby cauldron in Denmark. As you can see, she exists in a very fragmentary state again on the Marlborough bucket as another parallel. And what's brilliant about this is that this particular type of female depiction is only seen in 2 locations in the UK in metalwork. Lincolnshire, which is okay because there's a bit of everything in Lincolnshire to the point it drives me nuts. But the only other place, and actually the place where you see her most, is in the southwest. And nobody knew that when this was dug up. Nobody had any idea about this. And so actually what we're seeing here is that the depiction of humans here of this earlier Iron Age style are relating to local preferences and subject matter. It's not this idea of a homogeneous Celtic Europe. Throw that out the window. It doesn't exist. It never existed. This is to do with a local place built by local people with local art for local purposes. We do have Romano-British work with that added classicism, the influence of Roman classical art. That is literally it. Those 2 fragments. That's it. No statues, no bits of Aphrodite, etc. Nope. That's it. And yes, they have the slick back hair. Yes, they are of that fashion, but that is literally all I can tell you about them. They could date at any point from the late 1st century AD through to the 3rd century, 4th century AD. Does that mean that people here are specifically ignoring classical art? Well, it is possible, but it could be that actually classical art is accepted amongst several art styles. And most of those art styles are make it up as you go along category. The big challenge about this study and about this site is that, as you can see, there is absolutely no consistency in style of subject matter and artistic execution whatsoever. Massively challenging this notion we have about art being a very controlled practice, essentially a very socially and politically controlled practice. This is all finds from a single pool. We have multiple pools on site, not just the main votive one. These are all from pool 5. And as you can see, we've got a nice bit of Romano-British. We have bits that that might be slightly on the Iron Age side of things. That, I don't even know if that's a head. We have objects here that, you know what, sometimes you just have to admit you don't know. And this is one of those instances. You can also see I've got some rather large heads. This is a solid piece of stone that I can't even lift on my own, which is about that big. So in this single pull, we've got everything from heads that fit into the palm of your hand through to essentially mini monoliths, as I like to call them. But here's the really interesting thing. We are actually starting to get, through analysis of the material, indications as to who's being worshipped here and why. And one of the key pieces is actually here in head 119. And another key piece, despite its fragmentary nature, is head 120 that you've seen before. But actually head 120 may have been purposefully fragmentary, may have been made just as a fragment, not necessarily ever a whole. And I'll explain why in a minute. And it just also show you the general broadness of abstract and unidentifiable work. We don't just have material deposited here, which is very nice and well worked. We've got a bit of everything, again, confusing the picture. But you can see that some of the fragments, in fact, all of the fragments of eyes particularly, have something in common. Can anybody point out to me what the commonality is between all these pieces? Be brave. They're all the right eye. Which, if these were just random fragments, that's an odd thing, isn't it? That all the eye fragments we have are all the right eye, because this is the entirety of the site. This isn't just a small selection. So that was immediately unusual. And what I found very unusual as well is that two of them are much larger, the male and again the female. And then we've got different ranges of styles as well. And immediately that made me think of something else when I came to have a look at a few other fragments. And we have fragments of just noses and mouths as well. Again, items that appear to be made just as fragments. 107 is literally just a nose on its own. Although if it did come from a statue or a head, it would have come from something similar to the size of those recently excavated in Carlisle, which are like that. So again, on your statue, mini-lith, monolith kind of level. So why have we got fragments? Does this make sense? Well, yeah, actually it kind of does, because despite the fact they have no classical realism to them whatsoever, what they probably are is the creation of cultural Roman votives. This is something that the Romans nicked from the Greeks. So basically what you get in temples is once your prayer has been answered, as a thank you, you will give them, often in Greece and Rome, a mass-produced terracotta votive based on whatever your prayer was about. This is basically a representation of your prayer prior to literacy being common. So we have thumbs, we have hearts, we have uteruses, we have legs, we have breasts, we have also almost every body part you can imagine. It is there. This is something that the Romans borrowed. You can see it really, really commonly throughout the empire. The big difference between our site and what goes on in the empire is that in the empire, they were mass produced in terracotta. One particular temple has 2 pits of caches because the temple actually got full of votives and they had to remove some so new ones could come in. And they've got 2 massive caches of over 8,000 of these artifacts. That's the mass production we're on about. But actually what we've got here are the eyes, the noses, all in this kind of tradition. It's just being done in the local stone by locals in the local way. But we also have this. This is a model of a swaddled infant in stone. And what's brilliant is that it's actually not unique in the empire. There is another one known, made from the local tufa stone down the road from Rome in Capua in Italy, where it's a mother goddess temple that's sort of combined with Roman cultural elements, but is very much a local deity. And in this combination of temple, you have hundreds and hundreds of these statues of seated mothers. Some of them have no babies, some of them have 2, some of them have like 9 somehow sitting, kind of slightly impossibly. And this is really important for 2 reasons. One, really nice example, again, fitting into known local variations on Roman cultural practice, okay, that we've seen throughout the empire. But the great thing is it gives us an indication as to who is being worshipped here and potentially why. There seems to be the indication that a mother goddess figure of some kind, possibly the Roman Matrona Tuta, is being worshipped at this site. And you may be thinking, well, Reb, that's only one find. How much can you really say that? Well, I can say it for another reason as well. The area of the Debunny, that's the local Iron Age population term for the area of Gloucestershire that we're in, are famous for their mother goddess cult. It's a very unique thing in Britain. It's been recognised for the last 40 years. So, I'm not the only person that's been coming up with this. And often what will happen is you will get a seated mother goddess figure, as you can see in this image, with 3 hooded figures, 3 hooded attendants. These hooded attendants are known as Genius Cucullati when singular, or Genii Cucullati as plural. They're basically good luck gremlins. They're kind of good luck leprechauns. That's the best way I can describe them. But they are often, very often, when they appear at a temple, it's because at that temple there is a mother goddess association of some description, whether it be the direct Roman Matra Matuta or a local goddess figure that's being incorporated into a Roman style temple. And just in case you don't believe me, there's another one. And these 2 that you've seen are both from the Corinium Museum in the Cotswold stone tradition, and there's loads of these bloody things. The evidence for it is all over the place. And guess what? We've got Genii Cucullati at this temple as well. We have the ugliest Genii Cucullati in the entirety of the Roman Empire and the least consistently made, but it's that pointed head type that is really that very classic identifying marker for these. And so once again, we're seeing sort of the mixing of Roman and local cultural imagery and being done in a very local way, which is what confuses us about this site so much, is that it's difficult sometimes to identify these bits of evidence because they're not what we expect to see, or done in a way rather that we expect to see. We also have other subjects in stone that we do typically see at other temples as well. We have birds. On the left is probably an eagle, again, quite a common a depiction of an animal that we see at several temples, again, probably some influence from Rome. I don't know what 174 is. I haven't got a TARDIS to ask the artist. Bird, yes, but that's as far as I'm going to go on that one. But then we have some water birds depicted as well. And what's really interesting with these is this particular one was found in a pit and it is made from chalk. And chalk is not local to this site whatsoever. So, and I'll talk about chalk and stone sources and stone varieties later on. But water birds, again, are known, funnily enough, from temple sites with water-based associations with mother goddess figures. We're starting to see, again, this consistent underlying pattern of animal use, of human use as subject. We have some other animals, again, just executed in this very local way. The top H44 is a horse. We can say that with certainty thanks to the mane at the top, despite the fact the mouth has been a little bit damaged. And then we've got animals that I can't be certain about what they are species-wise, possibly serpents, but again, I prefer to err on the side of caution with this. Always happy to take suggestions. And the presence of the horse may suggest that a deity like Apollo Belenus may also be worshipped at this site. But the problem is I don't have enough other evidence from all the other finds to suggest another deity is definitely being worshipped here. This temple doesn't have to be a one-man band in terms of a single deity only. It's possible multiple deities were worshipped here, but it's that mother goddess figurine, probably of the Debunny, is the only one I can really get a hand on. It's really important, however, when you look at art, to actually look at the nitty-gritty of production and also even measurements and numbers, which may shock some of you to hear, despite the fact I come from an art study background. But actually, we need to look at how these items are used, and how they're manufactured can sometimes give us clues to that. So, for instance, here we have a series of 3 slab-type heads, and as you can see, they're all made in very specific ways to be the slab-type shape. And what this suggests is that these may have been inserted into alcoves or walls to be displayed, which is very, very different to the majority of artifacts you've currently already seen, which are very much handheld, tactile. Some of them can stand up quite well and may have been on display, but they're more designed to be seen in the full round, whereas these are designed purely to be seen from front on. So that tells us that art may well be part of the architecture here. So despite looking like a very Roman building, actually design aspects may not be as Roman as you think. But when you look at the numbers, in terms of measurements, in combination with the features and in combination with the art styles, we've actually managed to identify at least 7 individual makers of heads, which is really cool because that's something that I never expected to be able to do. And it is very much based on style and size. Here, for instance, we have maker number 1. What's really interesting is that these 2 fragments, again, nose and mouth, were probably made as fragments because size-wise they're so similar. Head 52 here, you'll notice it looks like it's got a softer face. It's actually got a face painted with a clay slip. It's the only example of painting I have on this site from this particular period, but from earlier periods, we seem to have evidence of ochre. And I'll come on to colours in a minute. Here's another maker. In this instance, 3 very different sizes, 3 different features, but clearly the style of the features are what gives this away for another maker. And sometimes we think we may even have makers, multiple makers that are working to the same baseline of size and standardization. These are from 3 different contexts, but all roughly the same horizon. And they are made by 2 or maximum 3 individuals, and they don't differ more than 2 millimeters in their height and width, which is quite astonishing given it's really friable sandstone and a wet site. And so what we're possibly suggesting with these particularly mini heads, it's possible, again, we're seeing this notion of Roman votive production and this standardization of a single form, a bit like in your terracotta, except they're doing heads because that's what the locals want and that's what the locals do. And this time in the local stone. You'll notice as well that one in the top left corner, H133, is burnt. We do have evidence for a couple of heads that have been burnt at some point. We're not entirely sure why, but there are some secondary treatments that do occur. But unfortunately, there's no distinct patterns that we can find. I've mentioned geologies before. As you can see, we have a huge variety of geology. Now, this is on the River Severn. You are going to get erratics from the river of different geologies that people might think, oh, shiny, work into a head. Great, fine. But we definitely have geologies here that are definitely not from the river and definitely not very local. On the site, what is interesting is that we get these coloured sandstones. It's like a yellow with a purpley red, but you also get a purpley red and green. You get the red and white, this mix here. You get the standard red. But then we've got at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 chalk artifacts, chalk outliers. And the nearest chalk to here is Wessex. It's a long way away. It's not just a day's journey. Why is chalk being brought to the site? And actually, can we identify specifically where this chalk comes from? We are going to be taking thin sections of geologies, doing the petrology work with Gareth. That is like my next thing. And we are going to be seeing if we can identify how far some of these stone sources are coming from. Because it could be that actually this is not just a temple for the locals. It could be that people outside of the Dubunni traditional area know about this and are coming here, possibly because of this mother goddess figure. You don't know. But one of the really, really interesting things about this site is something that we often don't consider, and it's actually a colour palette. We seem to have a real consistency in the colours that are used on this site, from your very dark blacks through to your reds. This particular head, H186, we have 2 eyes indented here. This is literally a solid lump of ochre. There is an ochre mine not too far away. We have heads like this, which are made out of the red sandstone, but are then embellished again with red ochre just to make that colour even brighter. We then move on to sort of the browns to yellows before then moving into the whites. What's really, really interesting about this colour palette is colour isn't often very much talked about in Iron Age art. Mainly because we focus on metalwork, and so when we focus on metalwork, it's the goldy nature of bronze and the red enamel or red glass that's often inserted into it is the most common. So it's a very sort of 2-dimensional colour palette situation. And often we don't often look at geology when it comes to Iron Age sites very much. Whereas when you read up in Neolithic and Bronze Age, particularly increasingly in early Bronze Age, Middle Bronze Age monument building studies, actually particularly one from Francis Healy in 1982, colours are really important. The colours of stones to create stone circles are really important. Particularly up Nessa Brodka, the big stones. I want to say Staithness, but it's not Staithness, it's the other one. And it's interesting there that actually the colours that are important are dark greys to blacks, red/pinks, and whites. And so what I'm wondering with this site, especially knowing it has an earlier history, do we have this preservation, if you like, of colour palette, particularly where we've got the red ochre concerned? And actually what's amazing is from an earlier point on this site, we actually have grinding platforms that have ochre still embedded in them where they've been used to prepare this. So instead of looking at the Iron Age and looking at temples in either very Roman colours or very kind of sepia brown colours that you kind of sometimes think of prehistory, this would have been an incredibly vibrant place and an incredibly colourful place, almost akin to early Catholic churches of the early medieval period. There's something very different here, and the colour choices are very, very purposeful, which is really, really cool. I'm going to move on to those questions that I said I was going to answer at the beginning. And the big question that so many people have been asking and that we've had to really tackle with is actually, how unusual is Dean Hall? Because some, and I'll be totally honest with you, some have looked at all the imagery and gone, how can this be real? Is this a little bit too good to be true? Because it's so very much challenged what we expect from a site like this. And so breaking it down into several aspects, actually, I can show you that there's very little at Dean Hall that we can't parallel elsewhere. That's the great news. Veneration of the deep past, temple complex at Frilford, the Bronze Age burial activity, there's Iron Age pits, and the Bronze Age ditches continue to be recut right through until the 2nd century AD, and then the Roman temple complex is put smack bang on top of it. If that isn't veneration of the past, somebody tell me different. It's not the only temple site where we do have this notion that these locations with deep histories continue to be venerated. And again, just because the Romans come in and you see Roman cultural architecture, it does not mean that local ideas are stamped out or leave the room. You know, it's not as if they suddenly disappear. In terms of veneration of the recent past, i.e. connections between sites that are clearly important in the Iron Age and then continue into the Roman period, Hailing Island is a classic example. So again, what's going on at Dean Hall and with all these other temple complexes, it's not unusual whatsoever. How unusual is Dean Hall regarding the lack of animal bone? Is this just down to site soil conditions or is this down to something else? Well, we do have some of those earlier cremations that, even though they're not great, have survived. So I kind of sort of wondered, well, could it be that there's a cultural reason why we don't see animal bone included on this site? And then reading through particularly Tony King's brilliant study published in Britannia, you realise that actually there's a lot of other temples that don't have animal bone. Some that have masses of it from several animal sacrifices over the years. Some that don't, and those that don't include Bath, Source de la Seine, and Chamillier. What links them all? They're all shrines associated with healing springs and water, and often mother goddess figures as well. What's Dean Hall? A site associated with a spring, water, veneration, mother goddess. Actually, it turns out it fits into a pattern. The lack of animal bone is actually quite likely a cultural decision because of the type of centre that this is. How unusual is Dean Hall regarding the intensity of artefacts? Well, regarding the intensity of human depictions, absolutely really unusual. The largest collection from the country, in the country, bar none. But if these were seal boxes, if these were lead scrolls, if these were brooches, if these were coins, nobody would bat an eye. Actually, intensity of artifact types or artifacts generally is something that absolutely occurs at temple sites. It's just instead of being metalwork, this happens to be the locals doing the local thing, and it happens to be heads in stone. So actually, in terms of general behavior, this is not actually a ridiculous notion. And the big question, however, is, as I come back to, how unusual is that intensity of human imagery? Yes, for Britain, it's unique. But there's a really famous site that was excavated in the 1950s and 60s at the Temple of Sequana, Source la Seine, France. Over 400 known examples of human imagery from a single temple site, an awful lot of it in wood, which would not have survived at our site. And as you can see, female, male, heads on their own. Gina Cuccolati, hello. So actually, when you do look beyond the surface and you do the digging, excuse the terrible pun, and when you do look beyond what we think is normal for us, actually, there's very little about this site that is actually that crazy unusual. And we're very lucky that the landowner, when digging, although it did slightly overwhelm them in the end, we're very lucky that, you know, they kept reaching out to try and get people to take this seriously and to take this site seriously. And it's been an absolute joy to work on so far. We've still got a fair bit to do, but we finish in June, and I'm more than happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rob. This is it's been really fun to see all of the things that you're doing. I have a question, but does anybody else want to go first? Julian.
Amazing time and brilliant images.
Thank you.
I always understood that the sort of interpretation of a lot of these watery sites with votive offerings is that you offer to the god what you were wanting to be healed. So,
yeah.
So you put a leg in if you've got a gammy.
Apparently, this is a misnomer, and that's exactly the attitude I came in with. But there's a brilliant paper by it was done in the 1980s, and it's in Britannia, and it's a female author. I'm sorry, I can't remember it, but I'll find it. And actually, she explains we've got this slightly round the wrong way. You go to the temple and say to the deity, I will do this for you if you do this for me. And so actually we should look at votives in temples as prayers answered rather than prayers given. Slight difference when it comes to literacy and when it comes to written prayers going in. That is a slightly different kettle of fish, but there seems to be this other way around of thinking of it.
But could it be, and I suppose this would fit with that this is a national place that people are commissioned, that whether it's you're doing it in advance or going to facts, if there's is like the equivalent to the ear, nose and throat specialist that
very possibly, yeah.
A consistent head problem, you go there and give thanks because your headaches or
something, yeah, absolutely, it absolutely could be. I mean, it's certainly in the Roman period, the Roman cultural understanding of it, maybe. I'm not sure what the Iron Age, the locals doing it, whether it's representation of individual social classes or something that's a little bit more nuanced before then kind of they go into that Roman votive element of doing things. So yeah, for part of it, certainly, but whether that explains the Iron Age aspect, I don't know.
So I've got two questions. The first one is just pretty simple and technical. I know you're going to be using the Arctic hand scanner. What do you think you'll add to your analyses? That's the first question. And then the second question is, like, you have what you think of as makers that you've identified throughout these. Where did they live?
Yeah, this is going to be a big problem. So where we are is in the Forest of Dean, and actually archaeological knowledge of settlement archaeology in the Forest of Dean is not very good. Whereas you hop over the river into the Cotswold region and you've got all over the place, you've got big Iron Age cemeteries. I'd nearly go as far as to say urban centres, almost as close to urban centres as you get without calling them towns, that then all continue throughout the Roman period. So these are going to be relatively local, I imagine. In regards to ArcTech and 3D scanning, in terms of detail, I'm not sure it's going to get to the detail to what I've got with 2D imagery. And this is one of the things with 3D scanning, but what it will be able to do is provide that tactility of object to viewers that cannot handle the objects themselves. And I think that's where its value lies, particularly with these smaller heads, especially if we can put them all in the same scene kind of thing, to see how they compare, rather than just being able to read numbers off a page and hoping that that kind of gets through. I get a little bit split with 3D scanning, I'll be honest, because sometimes it works really well to bring that tactile image to life, and sometimes it's a bit gimmicky. And I'm hoping obviously to do the first, not the latter, and try and make it more useful in that sense. For me, it's the RTI dome and the Dynalite have contributed that bit more because of that, being able to get to that fine detail and unpicking the lives of these objects a bit more.
Another question, but is there anything online? No, just me. But I guess last question then, if nobody else wants to go, is that there was with the figurines at Châteauroux, Lynn Mescal and Carrie Nakamura, they shot little videos showing handling of the actual thing, the figurine, to kind of show the different, how it would fit in the hand, and how it might be animated by human action.
Yes.
Should we do this with this project?
I mean, we can attempt it, but because they're such differing sizes, some of them do fit in the hand really well, and then you've got the really tiny ones that I would be afraid to drop. Like, you know, they're not practical actually, if anything, they're more like niche. More than happy to have a go. But we don't have any of, great thing about the Châteauroux figurines is they're full, you know, and we don't have that here. We don't have that notion that actually these are meant to be repeatedly handled, unfortunately. More than happy to have a go.
Maybe I'd ask Colleen, you mentioned about work that Rev has done in terms of engaging with the public. And I was wondering whether you've done that with these images that you've shown us. And I guess going back to that question about the 3D versus the 2D, like, do you have a sense of what people who you engage with how they want to engage?
So, okay, so the most engagement I've done is very similar to this at the moment. I did too many talks last year, 2 of which were on this, and they were conference rooms. And actually they were really happy with the 2D because it's in detail front to back, because you've got that clarity. And often I will put a big piece on a single screen so everybody, whether you're very close to the screen or well back from it, can see it. And most of the talks I do to a lot of these archaeology societies are of a particular older, less technical demographic. So they're more than happy with 2D images. Unfortunately, what we don't get, and this is a problem in community archaeology groups, is we don't get a lot of younger individuals, or those that are more technically minded at times, who want to then engage with the 3D online. And so as much as there is an audience, I think maybe in a more museum-based setting like Yorkshire Museum, this would work very well as that, or Corinium Museum as like an exhibition space and 3D being part of that. When it comes to public talks like this, unfortunately, the audiences that I end up speaking to, the 2D works perfectly well. When it comes to what's going on in the ADS, all the 2D, and we'll be 3Ding about half of them. So there will be that option for people to engage in what they want to engage with.
And
But also, sorry.
I was just going to ask if you're thinking about like 3D printing as well, and 3D
Yeah,
scanning.
I would love to do that with 3D printing and scanning, especially for the tactile being for people who particularly have eyesight issues to be able to tactily handle these things. And it is also through handling that you pick up certain things as well. So I would love to do that. I don't think the landowner would have any issue with that. Yeah, I would love to do that.
This is likely to be this topic of digital creativity next year.
Yeah.
So we're going to hopefully have the data in place to be able to have students play with it for a module.
Yeah, please give us 3D printer parts, I think.
I'd love to. I'd absolutely love to. It's on my very long list of to do things. No, it's fine. I only have till June to complete this, and it's not enough time. But I will get there. But yeah, and if, as I said, the landowner's great. That's the wonderful thing. He has been so welcoming and so very keen to get stuff done, because they never expected this. They were completely yeah. So
Richard looks like Richard has a question.
Yes.
Richard.
Oh, thanks, Colleen, and thanks, Reb. It was fascinating. It's great to see all this sort of brought to life after all the conversations we've had. So 2 things for me. One is just a big thank you to you for taking the RTI equipment and running with it and really showing what's possible. And obviously that has made a positive impact on the research you've done here. And then the second thing is something for you and I to maybe catch up with offline, is about how you might employ the new VHX microscope, the Keyence microscope, for further analysis of this project, if that's something you're interested in. So you've
that
got
was something I'm interested in, but actually I might have another group of material that might be better suited for that. I can't talk about anymore right now. Let's have that meeting.
Yeah, because it basically, on top of the high resolution, so like 2000x, you've got the 3D surface analysis. So that allows you to do the multi-focus imaging, sort of like you do at the macro scale, but on the micro scale, and it'll generate real-time height maps and 3D rendering for you.
Let's
quantitative
have a chat about that, definitely. Yeah, because the problem is a lot of this sandstone, the minute you get a friable surface, you lose the detail that would be great in other stone types to see, was it a flint tool, was it a metal tool? You've lost it in the sandstone, and sandstone in this is like 80% of the stuff. But as I said, I've got another group of material that we could play with a lot with
and
saying. So
and just to add on the imaging end of it as well, so that microscope also has an elemental analyzer head. So for a rough overview of any inclusions, and and the components that make up the materials that you're looking at, it can do that as well. So yeah, it'd be great to catch up with you and see what we
would
could
be
do with
awesome. Yes, I definitely have material we can play with that one.
Cool.
Yeah, I'll be in touch.
Thanks again.
No worries. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We look forward to hearing more in time.
Well, I have like to.
Next week will be a Ted Burke's talk about smell and digital archaeology. So I'll update everyone about that by email. I've actually already came out. So see you next week, hopefully.
Is that all right? So, let me stop this one. Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah.